Hey folks, this is Kalani. There's some changes coming to the Garrison system in 6.1 which seems to be right around the corner. So this leads me to ask one question. What exactly do we want the future of Garrisons to be? What do we want in the future to add to the Garrison system? Now the ones coming in 6.1 are the jukebox, allowing you to change the music playing in the background of your Garrison, and then there's also some form of vendor, I believe, which will allow you to purchase, either for coin or garrison resources, potentially, the followers that you missed due to your building choices while leveling up. So if you locked yourself out of certain followers, you will now have access to those, so you can expand your little family of followers for whatever price they deem necessary. So those are two really nice additions. I really like that they're bringing that in, but what else do we want from Garrisons in the future? So, the first thing probably on everybody's list is more. Now, that's pretty broad, so let's break that down a little bit. More followers, maybe? Well, we're getting that actually. We're getting one additional follower that I know of in 6.1, the legendary follower from the legendary quest. Now, if you don't know who that is, I'm not going to spoil that, but I'm wondering how they're going to balance that. Will that follower come with a set list of traits and abilities, or will that be randomized like everything else? And then, you kind of have to question, what point is there in bringing more followers into the mix anyway, when everything boils down to a numbers game? You could bring in more iconic figures, that would be a really nice way to do that, but the inn kind of lets you pick and choose between random followers anyway, so part of the functionality might not really be necessary, and that would be very fluff related, which, you know, fluff is good, we like fluff. Fluff is very good indeed, but the more followers you add, the more you have to choose from. And when you have to choose from them, it's always going to come back to that numbers game, because you're not going to run around with 16 of the same counter ability. That just doesn't really make any sense, even if those are the shiniest, fluffiest characters you know from Warcraft lore. It's not really going to help your garrison. So more followers might not really be something we'll see, except for that legendary follower, basically due to the random nature of followers, and we already have access to the inn. Now, speaking of the inn, that's a building. More buildings. How about some more buildings, guys? Now, there is one plot, actually, in the Alliance Level 3 garrison, one small plot, which was supposed to be there, and it's been removed due to size restrictions, I guess. But either way, there's a plot there which can be used in the future. Is that going to remain empty? That's a small plot which is just craving to be eaten up and devoured by a brand new building. But what buildings would you add to the garrison system? They have a lot of the functionality covered already. Now, one thing that I can think of is a barbershop. They don't quite have the barbershop there, which might be a nice addition for all those folk who like to get their hair cut every other hour. Some nice additions to the small buildings I'd like to see would be maybe a cooking building, first aid, archaeology. Those don't really seem to have been given a great deal of attention at all. Archaeology, somewhat, when you can get some fragments from the mine, but it's not really a building in and of itself. I think it would be really cool to have a little dig site in your garrison, maybe digging up some random artifacts, maybe a whole bunch of artifacts, maybe it's somewhere where you prospect and have a look and sort of mill over some artifacts that your followers have brought back. Maybe that's a new mission to bring back artifacts which may be rare toys, maybe just some spare fragments, maybe some scrolls. You know, there's a little bit of potential there with archaeology, even though it's not been the most exciting thing in the last expansion or two, but you could pump some more life back in there maybe. And then cooking. Cooking kind of got the shaft when the barn is the only place to get a 100 stat feast. Now cooking, you can make the 100 stat food specifically for a stat, which is nice for things like multi-strike or versatility, where it may be your main stat, but you obviously don't have that much of it, so the feast is giving you haste or crit. That's a nice little thing for cooking. I like that that's still a thing. But that's only really a thing for the people who want to squeeze every drop of DPS out of their character, and that kind of player seems to be dwindling a little bit, which is sad to see. Cooking building, maybe an animal being butchered randomly. Maybe something like barn, where you bring an animal and it can be butchered and you get some more meat. Maybe you supply them with animals. I don't know. Maybe it gives you some random meat every day or something. Either way, if there's another way to get a 100 stat feast, or another way to get 100 stat anything, that'd be really nice for cooking, simply because you can't get the feast. It's really disappointing to be a cook and have it all leveled up, and then somebody with a barn, anybody with a barn, can kind of outshine your little works of art, which is slightly disappointing. So that's maybe something they can bring in. And then first aid. I don't really know what you'd do for first aid. Maybe one of those cosmetic buildings. Maybe it's somewhere where your injured followers can go and heal. Maybe it has some functionality in that it will reduce there's not really any downtime. That would have been a fun thing if there was downtime for some of your followers if they got injured, and then you could reduce that with the first aid building, but that's not really a thing, so that's kind of grabbing at smoke. But, you know, there could be some things there is a little bit potential there for small buildings. So that could be nice. But then going from there, the only things I can really think of, building-wise, are purely cosmetic. But that could be a really nice addition too. Can you imagine filling all your little nooks and crannies with bushes and trees and lampposts and, you know, think Sim City, think tycoons, where you can happily fluff up the place to your heart's content. We don't really have a great deal of that. We do have the little monuments which you need to have the specific achievements for, but apart from that, there's nothing really filling in all that space, and there is quite a bit of space in a level 3 garrison. It's not quite as full as I would have thought. Now that's all fine and dandy for small buildings and maybe some other little patches that they may introduce, but medium and large buildings certainly aren't the place for strictly cosmetic buildings. So what functionality could we add there? I can't really think of anything glaringly obvious there. I think they pretty much covered everything. I mean, you've got additional followers, additional follower cap, you've got new missions, you've got changing your guard's race. If you're exalted with them, you can do that at the barracks level 3, so there is some customization options there with all the functionality, but I can't really think of an additional large or medium building which would serve a decent purpose. One thing that I did come up with, and it's a super long shot, but it's something to do with the Darkmoon Faire. Now, there could be a questline over at the Darkmoon Faire to unlock some form of building for your garrison. Maybe one of the games, maybe something which involves some Darkmoon NPCs, which, you know, otherwise you'd need to go to the Darkmoon Faire for. That could be something with a little bit of potential, but that's the only thing with any functional purpose that I can think of for a large or medium building, which scares me a little. If there's no more functionality to add to the garrison, what does that say about the longevity of the garrison itself? Now, I know that they don't want to take this specific garrison forward into an expansion pack, which means the life of this garrison could be very short, because we know they want to make this somewhat of a short expansion. So, I'm actually wondering how much more we might get, which, for a system which took so much dev time to produce and to bring to life, it'd be so disappointing to see it go without maybe a few little touch-ups or a few little shiny additions. With all that said, we might just be stuck with cosmetic and shiny fluffy items being introduced, but one thing, which is probably way too much to ask, but one thing everybody would probably love to see is racial garrisons. Can you imagine having a pure night elf garrison over in Shadowmoon Valley? That fits it so perfectly. Maybe having trees for your buildings instead, like Warcraft 3, that'd be a nice throwback. Happily climb up a tree and see all the nice little innards. But for Horde, things could be super beautiful as well. Can you imagine a Blood Elf garrison with all your spellbreakers walking around, everything's nice red, golden, and so shiny. But, as I say, having racial garrisons would mean creating a building, model texture, and placement for pretty much everything for each race, which is a lot of work. That's probably way too much work for a garrison which might not last too long. But if something like this goes forward into the next expansion pack, that might be something to pitchfork for. Get your torches, get your pitchforks, and we'll try and get ourselves some Blood Elf, and other races, but mainly Blood Elf garrisons. That could be really cool. Either way, it seems as though they may have exhausted their potential for the garrison system. I don't see any more functionality being added here which would basically ruin capital cities. I mean, barbershop is probably the only thing which you would go to a capital city for that you can't do in your garrison now. So, I don't really know where to go with garrisons, I'll be honest, but I am definitely interested in your input. What do you think would be a nice addition to the garrisons? Bear in mind, we're getting the jukebox, so we can change the music. We're getting access to all the followers, which we haven't had access to thus far. And then everything else is pretty much up in the air. What would you like to see? What would you like to see implemented in the garrison system either now, in the future? What about later on? What happens when we go to the jungle, back to Tanaan jungle? What happens with Gromash, the assault on his stronghold, which I assume he's readily... Well, he must have a stronghold, otherwise we'd probably have knocked it down already. But what happens then? Do we build up our garrison some more? It's a little bit far to Frostfire Ridge. Do we build another garrison over in Tanaan? Do we maybe build garrisons near Horde and Alliance so that there's some PvP action fighting going on there? What happens for the garrison structure in the future? I'd like you to leave me your suggestions, your comments in the comment section below, and we can have a nice little discussion down there. But that's it for this video. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always, I will see you next time.